Governors have a whole lot of power, and there's all this talk of a Democratic wave, but the gubernatorial races nationwide should stand as a wake-up call for Democrats, because take a look here. The race raiders, governors post-2026 election, at least tilting to the Republicans. Look at this, a majority, 26. That is, at this point, the number of governors that are expected, at least tilting towards the Republican Party at this point. Democrats come in at just 20. The rest of the races are toss-up. Of course, you sum up to 50. And I will note that the Republicans right now hold a 26 to 24 gubernatorial seat advantage. So at this point, it doesn't look like Republicans on the net and the aggregate are actually going to lose any governorships. In fact, when you add in those toss-ups, they may gain. So this should stand as a major wake-up call to Democrats, because if there's a wave building, it has not, at least at this point, hit the state level when it comes to governorships.
And add to that, you point out that when it comes to governor's races, Democrats have had a bit of a problem over recent years. Yeah,
they have had a big problem recently. If you go back, the last time that Democrats held a majority of governorships was all the way back in 2010, and that streak is expected to continue. And I will note, I went all the way back through the record books, Kate Baldwin. I went all the way back through the record books. This is now the longest streak in which Democrats did not hold a majority of governorships in at least a century. This is a massive problem for Democrats because, as we mentioned at the top, a lot of the policy is determined on the state level. And if all of a sudden you can't actually lead a majority of governorships, the executive branch on the state level, that means Republicans are in fact forming and implementing most of the policies in the states, and therefore a lot of the policies nationwide.
Well, and the power of the governor also has to do with how the state legislature it looks. What are you seeing there?
Yeah, okay, so it's not just the governorships. How about those state legislatures, right? Okay, take a look here. Republicans have held a majority of state legislatures since 2012. And again, this is the longest such streak dating back at least a century in which Republicans have held the majority of the state legislatures. In fact, for much of the 20th century, what you saw was Democrats actually held more state legislatures than Republicans did. And now it is the exact opposite. And if you go state legislature by state legislature, at this point it seems likely, of course still uncertain since we have a number of months until November elections, that Republicans will continue the streak of holding the majority of state legislatures, continue their streak of holding the majority of governorships, and therefore Democrats will be locked out of holding a power in positions that really do determine a lot of the policy nationwide. As I said, this should stand as a wake-up call for Democrats, because at this point, Republicans look like they're going to continue to hold the majority of governorships nationwide.
A very interesting look at this. It's good to see you here. Thanks.
Nice to see you, Kate.
It appears, at least for now, that a bipartisan meeting of governors at the White House is back on after President Trump initially only invited Republican governors, but he's still blocking 2 Democratic governors from a separate dinner and attacking the GOP chair of the National Governors Association, a very conservative Republican named Kevin Stitt, as a rhino. Let's bring in Democratic Governor Andy Beshear of Kentucky to discuss it all. Governor, there's a lot of confusion over whether Democratic governors are still invited to attend this bipartisan meeting and dinner at the White House. Kevin Stitt, the Oklahoma governor and the chair of the National Governors Association, seemed to say that you and your fellow Democrats are invited, but then the president went on social media and attacked him. What's your understanding? Are you invited to these events? Are you planning on going?
It's just a lot of drama, and it's unnecessary. You know, governors wake up every day focused on getting results, on creating better jobs, creating safer communities, expanding access to health care, improving our public schools. And this meeting is an annual bipartisan tradition where we try to push our differences aside and talk about how we move forward in those areas. Yet the president has just turned it into drama, inviting and disinviting others. It no longer looks like it's going to be productive at all. At this point, I'm not going. If you're not going to invite all the Democratic governors, this chair of the DGA isn't going to be there.
So just for the record, it's Jared Polis of Colorado and Wes Moore of Maryland who are the 2 Democrats not invited. Are you worried at all that you not going will ultimately hurt your constituents in any way, denying you an opportunity to bring up your concerns with the president directly?
We've been able to communicate with this administration for our concerns, but there's a time when you have to stand up against the drama of a president that's turned an annual bipartisan tradition and is treating it like he's a 12-year-old and it's his birthday party, inviting and disinviting people, lashing out at others. The American people admittedly don't care about this dinner. They don't care necessarily about the meeting. They care about whether you're improving their lives, decreasing costs, trying to address their everyday challenges. So that's what I'm going to be focused on.
For the record, I've had two 12-year-olds, and neither of them would have ever done that. The administration is increasingly focused on the midterms. Earlier in the show, we played some sound from DHS Secretary Kristi Noem talking about making sure the right people are voting and electing the right leaders. Between that and the DOJ demanding voter information from states and the president saying he plans to implement voter ID requirements even without congressional approval, are you worried as a governor about what is going to happen at the midterms?
Well, it's my job to be worried. Kristi Noem's statements are wild and they are un-American. The president talking about not federalizing elections. He first said Republicans should take over elections in certain states. That is anti-democracy. But Democratic governors and AGs are ready to stand up and make sure we have full and fair elections. But I'll say this. If you try to intimidate the American people, especially when it comes to something so foundational as voting, I think you're underestimating them. I think you'd see huge lines and people singing. People want to be Americans first, and Democrats or Republicans second, third, or fourth. You put our democracy at jeopardy. You try to intimidate them from voting, and they will step up and protect this country.
But what are you specifically talking about doing if there is an issue?
Well, the first thing we do is go to court. That's what the courts are for. I've taken on this Trump administration despite being in a Trump plus 31 state over and over and over, and we've been winning. When they've tried to take the personal information of our citizens so that they can use it as they wish, we stood up to them. When they tried to cancel funding so that we could create a warning system in eastern Kentucky for the next time it would flood, we stood up to them. Time and time again, they've overreached, like trying to send National Guard from Texas to Illinois. We were a part of that lawsuit, standing up and winning for the American people.
You talk about needing FEMA in the case of a natural disaster of any sort. Are you worried at all about Senate Democrats blocking DHS funding in this latest government shutdown standoff?
Well, hopefully it won't last too long because FEMA is incredibly important and, I will admit, is operating pretty well under this president, at least the people on the ground that are helping people after the natural disasters. But ICE is out of control. They have an American body count. They have injured and wrongfully shot others. They have 2 agents that are being investigated for perjury, and their leadership attacks anyone involved in an altercation with ICE as domestic terrorists before they even know the information. This is a group that thinks they can barge into an American's home with an administrative warrant. We have to stand up for them, and Democrats should be using their leverage to try to get reform and retraining.
So you're the new chairman of the DGA, as you alluded to. You had an op-ed in the New York Times talking about how the focus of the Democratic Party must return to creating better jobs, more affordable and accessible health care, safer roads and bridges, education, communities where people feel safer. I have to ask, it's no secret you're weighing a potential presidential run in 2028. Do you think Democrats right now are conveying the message that you laid out in that New York Times op-ed? And how do you respond to a Democratic voter who might say, I like you, I like your track record in a red state or red Commonwealth, but you're too soft-spoken?
Well, first, yes, that message is working. Look at Abigail Spanberger and Mikey Sherrill, who ran great campaigns in races that should have been structurally difficult. And they both won by double digits. The DGA and our candidates are winning everywhere. For me, I believe that the American people want stability, that Donald Trump is exhausting. Many Americans feel like the pendulum swung too far during the Biden administration and has swung way too far during the Trump administration. And what they want is an America where they can wake up every morning and not be worried about its future. And I think they want leadership that's focused on them, on whether they make enough money to not only afford their groceries, but take their kids on that vacation that they went on as kids. That young couple wants to be able to afford their first home around the same age as their parents. People want to feel safe in their communities, believe their kids are going to great public schools. Those are the types of things that I think are not only appealing to the American people, but maybe can help us heal, to recognize that most of our concerns are the same, that our neighbor is not the enemy from within. She's just our neighbor doing her best in a tough world.
Governor Andy Beshear, thank you so much, sir. Appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.